Jesus to get bigger, the cross to work better, the resurrection to be central, and scriptures to get bigger, not smaller. I hope that's going to be your experience here tonight. Now, if you have less anxiety, if you know what's coming, which would be most people, let me tell you how I envision the night going, okay? First of all, I'd like to thank Lighthouse Church and the Moonta community for coming out and supporting this so well. This is my first time here, and you came. So I'm very glad about that. It's fantastic. Thank you for that. After this is over, we do have a small resource table set up at the back right there. We're going to make some space in front of that so people can access it. Those are all series of teachings. So if you like what you hear tonight, you think, I want to learn more about stuff like this, you can go back there. Everything has anywhere from 4 to 11 in each one. They're $40 a piece, or they're $160 for any 6, all right? So you could pick that up. The reason we do that is 2 reasons. One, we want to resource people very, very well. When your main theology education is from TikTok, that's not good, all right? So certain things sound good, right? But then turns out they have a few problems. Like, here's a statement that sounds awesome. This sounds awesome, right? Let's give everyone a Bible, right? That sounds amazing. Until technology caught up and everyone has a microphone to talk about it, right? And then you have what's called an ultra-crepidarian. An ultra-crepidarian is someone who spouts off confidently about something they're not qualified to speak about, right? And then you end up getting all kinds of nonsense on the internet. We want to resource people well with well-educated stuff, right? That's number one. But number two, we take Matthew 25 very seriously. If you don't know what Matthew 25 is, it's Jesus' last words, and he said, quote, whatever you did to the least of these, you did it to me, and whatever you didn't do to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. Now, that's very in your face, and however far you want to take it, I don't mind, okay, because it's your life, not mine. There's some things in there about eternal judgment and eternal life and sheep and goats and all that, but at the very base level, if the person who dies for you tells you what's important to him, at very least, it should be important to us, right? And so we use the profit from that to do that. Our main mission in the world are 3 children's homes in China that look after children with disabilities, 2 in Henyang, 1 in Changsha. So all I'm asking you to do is, after this is over, if you come by, let me put something in your hands that will change the way you look at God. You put something in our hands that helps us feed, clothe, shelter, educate children with disabilities. I think it's a pretty good trade, all right? We also, for those of you who are really serious, we also have a web streaming library that's available now. And the QR code is back there. You could just scan it, and that gives you access to everything we have. That works on subscription, not on purchasing. And so you can get that back there. Robin can explain it to you. The only thing I would ask is that if you don't want anything, God bless. I'll see you next time. If you know I'm going to grab something, I can already tell from the vibe of the night that this place has a real chatting afterwards culture, okay? They've cooked some pie-looking things. There's looks like a supper that's going to be coming out, right? And that means there's going to be chatting, and I think that's amazing. It's a whole lot better than you not liking one another, right? But if you don't want anything, go straight to chatting, right? But if you want something, if you would buy first and chat second, that would be amazing. The reason is I got to pack it down and drive it all the way back to Adelaide tonight, and then speak in Gawler tomorrow. Okay, so if we could do that, that would be fantastic. Also, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, particularly if you're over 40, which looks to be most of the room. All right. I mean, if you're ever, I'm over 40, right? All right. I'm 49. I'll just remove that mystery. If you're over 40 and you're doing something outside after 7, that takes an act of faith, right? Like you guys, yeah, I could tell that there was half this room was like, should we really do this? Should we just watch it, right? It's going to start at 7. What time is it going to be over, right? I get it. So if you're here and you're over 40, bravo. It's an act of faith. So we're going to really honor your time tonight. I foresee this being completely over at 8:15, all right? So everybody over 40 can take a deep breath and a sigh of relief. All right, we'll get home to watch a rerun of NCIS. We're good to go, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 things. I'm going to do a quick teach, right? And then we're gonna do something brave, all right? A little bit brave, and we're going to have a live Q&A, all right? So I love Q&As because it means I get to talk about what you want to talk about instead of monologuing, all right? So a good Q&A, though, is entirely dependent upon good cues. So let's define a good cue. A good cue has 4 things. 1, a good cue is shortly stated, all right? If you can't state what you're going to say in 20 seconds or less, think through it. until you can, because nothing ruins a Q&A like someone droning on and on and on and not getting to their question, okay? Number two, a good question is a question. It's not a statement. I'm 49. I'm at least of average intelligence. I've never, ever once been able to shift someone who started with their conclusion. If you start with your conclusion, I will graciously let you have your conclusion because there's no vacancy in the Trinity for me, all right? Number three, it's non-antagonistic. We're under a mandate from the Apostle Paul to do all things without grumbling or disputing with one another. And number four, it's mutually edifying. In other words, it's not so specific to you that it doesn't apply to anybody else in the room, all right? So after the short talk, we'll have some space for some mutually edifying, non-antagonistic questions, all right? And then we'll be done about 8:15, and all the people over 40 said, amen. There we go. All right. So the topic I was asked to cover tonight is, how does history affect how we look at Scripture? Like, I'm a Bible guy. I'm assuming it's a Wednesday night, you're in church. I don't need to be an evangelist. Everybody here is a fully devoted follower of Jesus. And if not, I would urge you to make that decision. But I'm just making an assumption that I don't need to come as an evangelist, right? And that's good because I'm not a very good one, right? I am a good teacher, right? And so what I want to do is I want to look at some Bible passages that together we can sort of journey with. How does the story underneath that story make more sense? Like, if you read the Bible at all and you care at all, it won't be, if you read the Bible every day for a week, there's going to be something in that week where you go, I'm missing something. Something's going on there that I'm not aware of. The author is assuming the audience knows something that I don't know. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble here, right? But the people who wrote the Bible never, ever, 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 ever thought we'd still be reading it, okay? The people who wrote the Old Testament thought it was for Jews. The people who wrote the New Testament thought Jesus was returning in their lifetime. And they were wrong about that, all right? So the idea that the Apostle Paul knew when he was writing Philippians, there's going to be a group in Moonta, there's going to be... No. So he makes assumptions in there that the audience knows what he's talking about. And so the whole Bible is kind of like that, where it does this. Now, let me tell you what I'm not interested in tonight. I'm not interested in this at all. So I want everybody to relax. I'm not interested in changing your beliefs, okay? I give everybody in here full permission to leave exactly how they came in, and it won't bother me at all. The reason is I don't get to say what the Holy Spirit is working on you with. I don't get to do that. If the Holy Spirit's not convicting you or doesn't move your heart by something I say, you have full permission to just leave it. Who cares? It's God's job to do all that, not mine. And the last thing I'd want to do is derail something awesome that God is doing in your life by coming in from another angle that we're not ready for, okay? So everybody has full permission to relax, and everybody has full permission to stay exactly the same, and I will not be upset at all. That said, I want to open up some passages that really bothered me, and when I learned about them, it set me free. Jesus got bigger, the cross worked better, the resurrection was central, and scriptures got bigger, not smaller. So I'm going to journey with a couple of them because history matters, okay? And so the first one is perhaps my least favorite story in the whole Bible. It's a story in the Bible that I never would preach. As a matter of fact, in the 1979 version of the NIV, in 6-point font at the bottom, there's an asterisk that says, we're not sure this story should be in the Bible, okay? It's that horrible of a story. The problem is it involves Jesus. It's not from like Habakkuk or Obadiah or something that we don't know about anyway, and we could just go, whatever, right? This is Jesus Christ stuff, and it's a story about a pool called Bethesda. I won't read the whole story because you'll know it basically good enough to know I'm telling the truth about it, but I will summarize it, and you'll understand why I hated it, and I'm thinking most good people hated this story, right? The story goes like this, right? That inside the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there was a pool called Bethesda. And occasionally, it says an angel would stir the water of the pool of Bethesda, and the first one in would get healed, and no one else. Is anyone okay with that story? That is an awful story, and it paints God terribly. Like, are you serious? Like, this is what it makes God look like. Like, it makes God look like he's in heaven and he's bored, right? And he's like, I'm bored. I need something to entertain my divine self. There is not enough to do. Get me an angel over here. The angel says, yes, sir, what can I do for you? And God says, now listen, there's a pool right there inside the sheep gate in Jerusalem, and it's called Bethesda. And only when I tell you, and I mean only when I tell you, I want you to take your finger, and I want you to stir the water of the pool. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to heal the first person that can get in, and no one else. We'll successfully create a race amongst the afflicted, because nothing gets my God heart beating like a bunch of crippled people trying to move fast. This is going to be awesome. This is just going to be amazing. So when I tell you, I want you to do it, right? And then the angel does it, and all these crippled people are trying to move fast to be the first one in. And there's some bookie in heaven going 20 to win 80, 20 to win 80, 300 to 1 on that guy. That guy's got no legs, 400 to 1, right? And so you got this whole thing going on. It's just a terrible story. If God is that kind of God where he's playing games with people's unhealable conditions, that would be awful. But it's in the Bible. So I just kind of ignored it because I didn't want any questions about it. And there's a ton of other things to talk about in the Bible, right? I just quite frankly hated it. But you couldn't really ignore it because Jesus gets involved, right? And then when Jesus gets involved, it actually gets a little bit worse, to be honest with you. So Jesus shows up, and he finds the sickest guy in the whole place. It says he was a paralyzed person for 38 years. Now, 38 years is a long period of time. If you're not 38 years old, you don't have any flippant idea how long 38 years is. That's a long time. And it says he was sitting by the pool for 38 years, waiting for his opportunity to be healed. And Jesus shows up, and if you remove your Jesus goggles, he is sarcastic. He basically says, what's the matter with you, bro? The water doesn't work for you, right? And the 38-year-old paralytic says, what do you mean, Rabbi? You know the rules. Only the first guy in gets healed and no one else. And that jerk over there with a sore throat keeps jumping in first. We can't ever be first because my legs don't work. I added a bit to that story for meaning, right? The sore throat guy does not exist, but that's the basics of the story. And then Jesus, without the help of stirred water, heals the guy. But that doesn't make you feel much better, because why is the whole system of the stirred water even there, right? And so I had this real problem with that. Now, I had a problem with it until I got invited to study in Jerusalem for a week with a history expert, all right? So this guy teaches PhD level history at the university there. He's a PhD level archaeologist and ancient history expert. And somebody gave him a USB of me talking from America. And so he wrote me and he said, I'd like to invite you to come speak to my Messianic synagogue, right? And you could stay in our kibbutz if you want. I said, no, a hotel will be fine, right? But anyway, that was the idea. And he said, part of your payment will be that we will, I'll teach you history for the week that you're there after you're done. So I'll teach you history, and I'll start as early in the morning as you want, and I'll go to as late at night as you want. You get to make that call. And I'm like, why don't we skip the part where I talk to people who've forgotten more than I know, and you just teach me. I'll fly there, you teach me. Anyway, the whole thing worked out. This guy blew my mind at every corner. Seriously, everything he taught me I had never heard before, and he's showing me pictures and places. It was pretty cool, right? So we walk inside the sheep gate, and I'm disoriented because I've never been there before. And we walk by the pool of Bethesda. And this is how uninterested he was in the pool of Bethesda. Here was his exact words. Yeah, that's the pool of Bethesda. And then he walked away. But I was amazed because I knew the story. Now, words don't matter. How we picture words working matters, right? So when we read the story of the pool of Bethesda, we have a certain picture in our head of what that looks like. In my head, I pictured a pool about the size of this room, and I pictured it about 18 inches to 2 feet deep. The reason I did was because if crippled people are trying to jump in, you cannot have a deep end, right? People would die, right? So this was my picture. I had no idea if I was right or not. I could not have been more wrong. When you read the Bible, you picture the story in your head. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, sometimes you're way, way off. In this story, I was way, way off. He says, yeah, that's the pool of Bethesda. I couldn't believe what I saw. Let me show you a picture of the pool of Bethesda. Oh, no. Yeah, it turned itself sideways. This is not going to be good. Let's see. So if you could turn your head this way. All right? This is the pool of Bethesda turned 90 degrees that way. It's 40 yards long, 30 yards wide, 40 foot deep. Just for some context, that right there is a bridge with a grown person walking across the pool of Bethesda. It is humongous and very, 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 very deep. Thank you. So I said, excuse me, I said to the history expert, is this the, thank you for all playing along with the thing that turned it this way, right? I said, excuse me, is this the pool where the angel stirred the water and only the first one in got healed? The guy said, yes. He said, do you have a question? I said, yes. How many people died here? He said, what? I said, well, follow my logic here. If your legs don't work and you're sitting by there and someone says, angel stirring the water, and you try to get in first, right? And you don't realize till you're in the water that you're number two, right? You're so dead, bro. That's 40 foot deep. His response was, you're joking. Everybody knows this, which was intimidating. Follow my logic. If everybody knows something and I don't know it, that literally makes me the dumbest person on earth, right? And so I played along for a second. Yeah. Why don't you tell me what it is everybody knows, right? And he says, you're joking. You don't know this? I said, no. I'm so embarrassed that I don't know this. He said, well, we're going to have to tell you, because if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, that would make God awful. And I said, yes. He said, I bet when you read this passage, you're embarrassed. I said, I am. And he asked me two questions. One, what God was ruling Jerusalem when Jesus walked the earth? The answer is Roman Caesar worship, right? Second, he said, you didn't think the angel in John chapter 5 was the angel of our God, did you? I said, well, it had crossed my mind. I mean, yeah. And he went, no. What kind of God do you believe in? Do you believe in a God that creates a race amongst afflicted people to play a game with who gets healed and who doesn't? I was like, no. That's why I would never talk about it. He said, no, the pool of Bethesda is a pagan place. Where we were standing was the temple to the Greek god of healing, Serapis. And this was the big pool, turned 90 degrees that way. It actually belongs that way. And so this pool would overflow. And when it overflowed, it would get into the city. So the city officials said, you got to make a catchment pool, like a flood deterrent pool. And they put that out in public. The big pool was in private. You had to be a member of the cult to be in there. The public pool was out in private. And it's about what I thought. It was 5 times the size of this room, but it was only 2 foot deep. I'm going to see if this picture is okay, this one. Hit the next one for me? Yeah, no, it didn't. So it's this way, right? It's actually supposed to be that way. So this was the catchment pool here. It's 2 foot deep. You got columns, something like that. And people would sit around it. And what they would do is when the big pool was going to overflow, they just pulled a lever and it moved water from the big pool to the small pool. And when it went from the big pool to the small pool, of course, in the small pool, it's bubbling up. So here's what the Roman officials did. They went to the priest of Serapis and said, let's tell the people it's the angel of Serapis stirring the water, and the first one in will get healed, and then we'll charge a monthly premium for people to sit the closest to the pool. This was Roman and Serapis purposeful oppression of poor and sick people, where people were paying a monthly premium to sit the closest to the pool, right? And they were taking advantage of these people. Well, now I can preach it. So what happens is Jesus in full character comes in and does an in-your-face confrontation to the oppressive nature of this nonsense. And he doesn't pick a guy with a sore back, although if you've got a sore back, it's the most important issue in the world. People say, well, it's just a back. It's just a back unless it's your back. If it's your back, that's a really flippin' important back, right? But this guy is paralyzed 38 years. And without the help of stirred water, he makes fun of the whole thing. He's like, the stirred water doesn't work for you, bro? The guy's like, no, you know me, Rabbi. Like, seriously, the first guy in, sore throat man, jumps in, right? What they would do is they had a plant. It was somebody who knew exactly when they were going to pull the lever. He pretended to be sick, And then he jumped in first and then came out healed, with only exacerbated the myth that this was working. Jesus walks into this epicenter of Roman and Serapis oppression of the poor and the afflicted, and he picks the sickest guy in the room, and without the help of stirred water, he heals the man, which revealed the nature of the problem. This made Jesus awesome. You start doing stuff like that, it could get you killed, right? So the history teacher teaches me all this, and then he says, do you have any questions? I said, yes. I said, where did you learn that? I said, I'm pretty educated. I didn't know that. He was so disturbed. He said, Shane, let me ask you a question. Be honest. Are there people in this world that think John chapter 5 is about our God? I said, there's a few. There's a few. Mostly from New Zealand. Mostly. It's mostly the Kiwis, and you know that to be true. No, Australians are a bit more put together, you know. It's mostly the Kiwis, you know. And he said, seriously, that bothers me. He said, where did I learn it? He said, Shane, it's everywhere. He's 65 years old. He said, I've never lived anywhere else. He said, right now is the first time in my life I ever considered that anyone thought that the angel of God in John chapter 5 was the angel of our God. He said, I've never considered that in my life. He said, look around. There's statues of Serapis. He said, the signs are everywhere. Can we go back to the pictures, or is it broken? Yeah, don't worry about it. Everybody's moving their head. It's fine. All right, thank you for trying, though. All right. Yeah, there we go. So what I did is, in the middle of this pool, there's a plaque. Can you go back one for me? Just so I can. All right, so there's the small pool, and right there's a plaque, but you can't really read that. And so if I blow that up, which is what this next one is, hit the next one for me. It just says Temple of Serapis. It's on a plaque in the middle of the pool. Everybody knows this. It gets worse. Next to the plaque was a billboard. The billboard was the size of that wall. Let me show you the billboard. Again, she might have to do this. Let's see what it does. Next slide. No, it's right side up. Check that. Do not turn your head on this one. It will confuse you. As you can see, you've got Bethesda at the top. It even cites John chapter 5 there, so people know what it's talking about. And right there where we're standing, pagan medicinal baths. Pagan medicinal baths. It's on a billboard next to a plaque in the middle of the pool. Everybody knows this. Which leads me to this question. If we were wrong about Bethesda, and we were, what else could we be wrong about? Maybe we need to open more discussions about God than close them down. Because can we all agree together, when it comes to God, on our best day, we're like 2-year-olds with blunt crayons drawing pictures with our left hand? The best person in this room, the smartest person in this room, they haven't even scratched 0.1% of what God is. And so to create an atmosphere of learning, we need to be open to things like that. That's one example. Let me give you a second example. So this is, this way. I'm going to go one more forward. So this is a story about Paul and an encounter with a people at the Areopagus. So the Areopagus was this place. We're going to talk about that in a second. But this story is so confronting. You have to know the history behind it to even scratch the surface of it. It says this: Paul then stood up at the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious. In other words, you believe in God. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, that's called idols, I even found an altar with this inscription, an altar to an unknown God. So you're ignorant of the very thing you worship. In other words, you know something in your heart, but you haven't had the ability to name it. Look, in the Christian tradition, we would say that the final and full way to experience and explore God is in the person of Christ alone, right? However, we would also give a wide swath of acknowledgement that at times Jesus is at work in people who don't know how to name him, right? Like you could say it this way: some people know it, they just can't name it. Like years ago, there was a guy named Sean Penn. Sean Penn was Madonna's ex-husband. And if you don't know Sean's story, 10 years ago, he got so moved, he sold everything he owned in Beverly Hills and gave it to the poor in Haiti. And not just that, he moved there to live the rest of his life to bless them. When the news asked him, what inspired you to do that? Sean Penn's answer was, I can't name it, but there was an internal hum urging me to live the rest of my life for the good of others, and I had to say yes. Ooh, some people know it. They just haven't had the ability to name it yet. This is true in the scriptures and in your experience. There's people in your life that know God is up to something in them, but they don't know what to call it. That's called normal. That's God at work in people who don't name him. This is true in the Bible. There's this guy named Cornelius. Cornelius is a Roman centurion. He's never heard of Jesus. Why would he? He has a dream. And the guy in his dream, a guy named Peter, shows up at his house. And he wrongly assumes that Peter's God because he was the guy in the dream. And he bows down to worship Peter, remember? And Peter has to do the most basic discipleship imaginable. Don't worship me. I'm not God. That's pretty basic. Cornelius says, you're not God. Seriously, why were you in my dream? And Peter says, because God chose you to pastor the first Gentile church. Cornelius says, why me? Let me remind you, I've never heard of Jesus till 5 minutes ago. That's number one. Number two, I don't know anything about your scriptures, your traditions, your beliefs, your customs, nothing. I don't know anything about this. And remember what Peter said? He said, I know, but God already counted you righteous because your generosity to the poor has went up as a remembrance to him. Some people know it. They just can't name it. In this story, that's what you have. Paul shows up and he affirms what they've been worshiping for years. He says you need to give it a name. He goes on. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. Let me be blunt. No one Paul is talking to here has ever heard of Jesus, except for the people who came with Paul. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Now, this is really confronting. Would Paul be allowed on our missions teams? Can you imagine if Paul was sent out as a missionary from Lighthouse Church and he came back with this story? I've been in Cambodia for 30 years. Nothing really has happened, but I found a temple that said to an unknown God, everybody was going there anyway, so we just called that Jesus and now we're done, right? That would be confronted, right? That would be a confronting sort of thing. But in this story, it seems pretty normal. Now, the question for tonight is there a story underneath the story that makes that story make more sense? And there happens to be, and I happen to know it, and so we're going to do it right now. This story centers around 5 things. 1, the Areopagus. 2, to an unknown God. 3, there's a guy named Megacles. 4, there's a guy named Cylon of Athens. And 5, there's a man named Epimenides, all right? So hold on to something. If you thought, I hated history in school, give me a second to redeem your boring history teacher. Here we go. First of all, there's a place called the Areopagus. The Areopagus was basically City Hall in Athens. It's also called Mars Hill. It's a place where they discussed public policy, what we would call politics. Essentially, you could come and you could present any way of living you would like. And if they didn't ask if it was right or wrong. This is what they asked. They asked if the whole world converted to this way of thinking, would the world be better? Pause. Every Christian should be asking that. If the whole world converted to how I'm thinking about God, would the world be better or worse? And if it wouldn't be better, there's a problem with how we're thinking. Now, if they thought it was better, they instituted policy. If they didn't, they killed you. So it took quite a bit of bravery to speak at the Areopagus. Paul goes to the Areopagus and he sees an altar that's inscribed in stone to an unknown God. And he tells the people, you've been worshiping this for years. I guess it's about time you knew his name, which leads to this question. Is there a story underneath this story that makes that story make more sense? Yes, there is. To understand the story, we got to go all the way back to 660 BC, where there was an Athenian king named Megacles. Now, this is going to sound like a bad Transformers episode, but just stay with me. That's what they called each other in those days, right? These guys sounds like Optimus Prime and Decepticons. It's Megacles. So Megacles was this narcissist megalomaniac who thought he was God in flesh. His policies were enriching the 1% and holding down the 99%. And so there was a guy named Cylon of Athens, and he started something called the Cylonic Revolt. The Cylonic Revolt was basically a bunch of farmers taking on a professional military with pitchforks and shovels, right? This is not going to go well. Can you imagine people from a small agricultural community trying to take on the professional military of the country you live in? That would be terrible, right? And so Megacles squashes it, and he lied. He said, if you just surrender amicably, I won't kill you, I'll just make you slaves, which was a good deal because they were kind of already slaves, you know? And so they took the deal, and he lied. He used them as public sport. The histories on this say he used wild animals to tear them apart in public. He did something called peeling, where he skinned them alive until they died. Some he scafed. Some he stretched out and he draw and quartered them. He had horses pull them apart. One of his favorite things to do was to disembowel people, where he would strap them up in public and cut their guts open and leave them out there just for everybody to look at. This is what happens when you cross me. Pause. Be very careful buying into the lie that the world's getting worse. Watch out for things like, oh, can you believe how bad this world is these days? Oh, God, can you believe how bad this world is these days? Compared to when? Seriously. Nothing is worse than Jesus' day. Nothing. Nothing. Here's a few things that were legal in Jesus' day. Murder, legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Rape, legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Pedophilia was legal, as long as they were lower class than you. Bestiality was legal and normal as parts of public acts of worship in certain temples. That was legal. Strapping someone to a post in the middle of town and beating them to death with whips, that was legal. Kidnapping underclass people from other villages and forcing them into arenas to be torn apart by wild animals or gladiators in order to entertain the upper class, that was legal. Go watch Gladiator 2. It's a pretty good rendition of that, and Denzel is awesome, all right? So, nailing people to trees and waiting for them to suffocate, that was legal in Jesus' day. When people go, oh man, you believe how bad this world is? Look, whatever your problem is with Albo, he ain't Nero, okay? Like, just a lack of perspective is the enemy of hope. Nothing's worse than Jesus' day. Nothing. Heck, nothing's worse than 100 years ago. Can you imagine if your great-great-grandfather came back from the dead and you had 2 days to convince him how hard the world is these days? Are you serious? Do you have a flushing toilet, right? Do you have feminine hygiene products? Are you serious? Everything's better. Everything except pollution. Pollution's not better. That's because we invented the internal combustion engine, which basically solved world hunger and then created another problem. And to be fair, divorces are not better. More people are getting divorced than ever before. Less people are getting married. That's not good. Depending on your perspective, that's not good. But that's just a result of medical technology. We're living so long. Seriously. In Jesus' day, they died at 32. So till death do us part was more doable. Now you have to live with them to 84. You got to be more careful when you marry somebody. It's got to last a really long flipping time, right? Right? But in general, the world's getting better. Back to Megacles. So what happens is what happens right after Megacles does this is there's a plague that comes on Athens. Everybody got sick at once. Now here's the thing, right? We would never do this today because we have microscopes. But back then, if everybody got sick at once, there were people who claimed that was God being upset. It was making people sick. Some even said it was the end of the world coming. Now, we would never do that. Never. We're far more sophisticated and intelligent than that. Back then, though, they weren't, and that's what they did. So here's what they did. They got together at the Areopagus, and they said, here's what we're going to do. We don't know what God is upset. There's thousands of them. So we're going to order a uniform sacrifice to every god everywhere. Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter what god you serve, you're going to sacrifice to that god. And so they did, and it didn't work. So here's what they did. They went from the Areopagus, and they consulted with a Pythian oracle. An oracle was your last line of defense against the gods. It was these weird people who lived in caves and stirred cauldrons and were thought to have special powers. And so they went and consulted with the Pythian oracle and told her the problem. And she said, well, if you've sacrificed to every god and it didn't work, there must be an unknown god. And it's him you must appease. They said, what's his name? She said, if I knew his name, he wouldn't be unknown. You've got to go consult with the great Cretan prophet Epimenides. He knows about these things. So they go to Crete and they find Epimenides. Epimenides is a famous prophet. He lived in the 600s BC. He's never heard of Jesus, but even though he's never heard of Jesus, he's quoted in our Bible 3 times by the Apostle Paul. Why? Because truth belongs to God regardless of what banner you put over the top of it. So they go find Epimenides and they bring him back to Mars Hill. I actually have a photo of Epimenides. I'm going to take a risk and see if he's right side of. There he is. That's Epimenides there. He looks like Uncle Jesse from the Dukes of Hazzard, or Uncle Herschel from The Walking Dead, or the lead guitarist of ZZ Top, depending on your generation. He was an amazing guy. He gets paid to come to Athens to solve the problem, and he's moved because there's all these people sick and laying everywhere, and he doesn't know what to do because there's an unknown God. So here's what he does. He says, I want all the sheep penned up over there in a rocky patch so they can't eat. And I need all the stonemasons right here at sun up tomorrow. So it's sun up the next morning. He released the sheep onto a grassy knoll, and he prayed a famous prayer. It goes something like this. O great unknown God, please forgive us for our ignorance of your great name. We just don't know who you are. But if you'll be kind to us, unknown God, for you are the creator God, the God of gods, the God Almighty, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Would you be kind, for we are your children, we're your offspring. Whatever sheep grazes normally, well, no, that sheep doesn't please you. But whatever sheep lies down despite being starved, well, no, that's the sheep that pleases you. Would you be kind to us, O great unknown God? And they released the sheep. And most sheep started eating, but a few sheep lied down. And he told the stonemasons, I want you to build an altar right where they lay and inscribe it, an altar to an unknown God. And then they killed the sheep on the altar to the unknown God, and the plague lifted. So from that day, Athens kept all their gods. But the unknown God was the God Almighty, the God of gods, the creator God, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Paul shows up 700 years later and says, you've been worshiping him for years. I guess it's about time you knew his name. Some people know it. They just can't name it. One of the things that will help us in our world is if we approach our world with a posture that God is at work in everybody, everywhere, regardless of their ability to name it or not. I'm going to end this part of tonight before we take our Q&As by sharing with you one of the most moving stories I've ever experienced. There's and I'm going to take a risk on this. No, it's not a risk. It's a photo, and it's going to be right side up. I just know it. I got to go to the Smithsonian Institute. The Smithsonian Institute is not one museum. It's 9 museums in Washington, D.C. And it's amazing, right there in the National Mall. And in the Museum of Natural History, I was with my friend, a pastor in Baltimore named Larry Kirk. And we were down there for a reason, and we were looking at things. And so we were wasting time before we were going to do our thing, and we went to the Museum of Natural History. And in the Museum of Natural History, there's an Egypt exhibit. And in Egypt, they believed certain things about the afterlife. Here's what they believed in ancient Egypt. When you died, you had 3 options. Included, outcast but redeemable, or annihilated, right? So you're included, welcome to God's good world, or you're kind of a jerk, but not a total jerk. You're going to be outcast, but I'm going to come preach to you, and if you want in later, I'll be able to teach you. Or you're totally unredeemable and annihilated. That's what they thought in ancient Egypt. So what people did is they paid money to write their obituary on the inside of their coffins, right? They were called sarcophaguses. And so I realize it's an incredibly primitive way of seeing God, but that's just what they thought, right? And if you thought that, you would have done the same thing. So they paid money to write their obituary inside the coffin, and the idea is when they died, God on the other side would open the coffin and read their life, right? And then decide, oh yeah, you're in, or you're not quite ready, or you're actually a total jerk, and you are annihilated. And so in that exhibit, they have all these coffins with all these writings. And in that was a man named Idu, or Idu, however you would say it. And he was from a town called Giza in Egypt from 2500 BC. And when I looked at his coffin, it was unbelievable what I saw. Inside his coffin, here was his testimony in English. Ready? I said and repeated good things. I said what was just. I did what was just. I gave bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, restored dignity to the broken. I was kind to my mother, respectful to my father. I never said anything unjust, evil, or malicious about anyone because I desired to be honored by the one true God and by people forever. That was on the inside of his coffin in 2500 BC, basically quoting Matthew 25. It gets better. In Egypt, they wrote in hieroglyphics. So I had to take a photo of this so I could show you. So here's the actual coffin, and here's the museum doing things to help us see. And you can see there, I said and repeated good things. I said what was just, I did what was just, and so forth. But remember, they wrote in hieroglyphics, and they read right to left. So I want you to look at the top right, and look at that first symbol. It's a head with a cross over the top of it. Everybody see that? So me and my friend Larry were quite moved by this and intrigued. So we asked the person in charge of that exhibit, excuse me, is that a cross over the top of a head? He said, yes. I said, well, excuse my ignorance of history, 2500 BC, that's before Abraham? Yes. Before Moses? Way before Moses. Before Assyrians invented crosses? Yes. And before the Israelites were in Egypt to invent crosses for Passover lambs? Yes. Where'd that symbol come from? That's number one. Number two, I said, I don't want to read into this. Is it okay to say that this man is giving a testimony that he surrendered his head or his authority or his way of thinking to a higher order of thinking as represented by a cross? He said, oh, yes, but it's bigger than that. I said, tell me about that. He said, because it's the first symbol, it's causative. So in other words, it's the reason for everything behind it. So the reason he gave bread to the hungry, the reason he restored dignity, the reason he was kind to his mother and respectful, the reason he did that was because he surrendered his head to a higher order of thinking as represented by a cross. I said, 2500 BC, there were no crosses. Where'd that come from? He said, are you a Christian, sir? Now, almost always if someone asks me if I'm a Christian, I say, I don't know. I don't know if I'm a Christian. And I just wait. And they'll always say the same thing. What do you mean you don't know? That's a yes or no question. I'm like, it's not, because I don't know what you think a Christian is. So why don't you tell me what you think a Christian is? I'll tell you if I'm that. Because words matter less than how you picture words working. What if the only Christian they ever met was a lunatic, right? But in that, I understood what that guy was saying. He said, are you a Christian, sir? I said, yes. He said, you know that part in the Bible that said God wrote his ways on people's hearts? I said, yeah. He said, maybe he meant it. He said, maybe God was reaching out to the whole world before Christians could complicate it by making everybody do it their way. Some people know it. They just can't name it. And if we posture ourselves in our world as, I know the answer to everything and you got to do it my way, is a whole lot less effective than us paying attention to where Christ is at work in all people and helping them name what's been going on in them all along. Any non-antagonistic, mutually edifying questions? I think Josiah's going to bring you a mic. That was 50 minutes of me talking. I hope it didn't feel like 50 minutes. I was just paying attention, you know. I know the over 40s are watching. I can tell you that right now. Who wants to start us off? Non-antagonistic, mutually edifying question. Be brave. Oh, good, my mate.
G'day, mate.
How you going, mate?
Good, thank you. I'd like to know the rest of the story.
Yeah, so I couldn't fit the whole thing on one screen, on one picture, but it says, I said and repeated good things. I said what was just. I did what was just. I gave bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, restored dignity to the broken. I was kind to my mother, respectful to my father. I never said anything unjust, evil, malicious to anyone because I desired to be honored by the one true God and by people forever. That's the whole thing. I just couldn't fit the whole thing on one slide. And especially if it turns 90 degrees, it gets very difficult. Any other non-antagonistic, mutually edifying questions? So the question is, I'll say it in the mic because of the, can I please give an overview of Melchizedek? So there's two ways to look at that character. There's probably more, but there's two ways that come to my mind. And again, can I just be clear about something? On my best day, I have not even scratched the surface of God. I'm a 2-year-old with a blunt crayon drawing pictures. So I'm learning as much as anybody else. So Melchizedek historically was Shem. It was Noah's son, Shem. And that's one of the few things not even argued about in Jewish history is Melchizedek was Shem. And he was teaching Abraham the ways of God, or specifically the ways of peace. And he gets introduced to the narrative in World War I, where 5 kings are fighting for. And they're all vying for Abraham's resources. And Abraham doesn't know which side to pick. And Melchizedek shows up and basically says, why pick a side? Just spread out a table and invite everybody to dinner and be reconciled. So he's the king of peace. Then there's this whole thing about foreshadowing that kind of high priest that would be revealed in Jesus. So Jesus was supposed to be this primary picture of the kingly function and the priestly function, and Melchizedek kind of brings both those together. But Jesus, to be honest with you, Jesus frustrated everybody. And he frustrates us a little bit. Like, it's hard to say that because we're Jesus people, but really, everybody in this room has wished Jesus would do something differently, right? Or more apropos, we wish Jesus would do something faster, right? Honestly, let's just be honest. We're in a safe space here, and you've thought that inside, and Jesus knows it, and he's not mad at you, right? But because Jesus frustrated everybody. In Jesus' life, there were 4 primary messianic expectations. The first one was the prophetic expectation, which was the prophet of God accomplishes the purposes of God by calling down the fire of God and destroying his enemies. They got that from Elijah, right? And so that's why Jesus' life, they're always, are you going to call down fire from heaven and destroy them? He's like, no! What year is it? They're like, but Elijah did. He goes, he did, but it didn't work. Seriously, did it accomplish anything? And Elijah ended up in a cave suicidal anyway, right? In other words, for Jesus, you don't accomplish the purposes of God by doing violence, right? The second expectation was kingly. So once they realized he wasn't going to call down fire, they were like, well, at least are you going to take over Rome? And he's like, no, because you don't invoke permanent heart change by legislating it. The idea that you can invoke permanent heart change by changing the government and legislation is ridiculous. Now, some good things can happen if the right people are making the policies. No question. And take your civic responsibility seriously and do vote. And if God called you to get involved in politics, then definitely do. But the kingdom of God cannot be established by getting the right guy in office, right? Because you can't invoke permanent heart change by legislating it. Look, there are some good laws, and they should stay laws. Like here's one: don't kill someone. If you kill someone, you don't belong in society, and we're going to lock you up. That's a good law. However, if the only reason you're not killing someone is because there's a law, I think you've missed the whole point, right? Be like, if they tomorrow made murder legal in Australia, how many more murders would there be? Not many. Seriously, because I'm going to make an assumption, no one in this room has killed anybody this week. Right? I'm also going to make an assumption that the reason you didn't kill anybody is not because the Bible says or because there's a law. It's because in your heart, it's just not in you. Right? Here's another good rule. It's in the Bible. Don't sleep with someone else's spouse. It's a good rule. Awesome, actually. Now, in Australia, that's not illegal. Right? It's frowned upon, but it's not illegal. But again, as good of a rule as that is, it doesn't change someone's heart. Look, I'll make an assumption that no one in here right now is currently sleeping with someone else's spouse. And if your heart's beating really fast right now and you're thinking, oh God, I hope he doesn't go prophetic, it's you. Stop. Cut that crap out, right? Cut it out, right? But I'll also make a bet that even though you're not sleeping with someone else's spouse, that the reason is not because there's a Bible verse. And if it is, that's really unprofound. Like try this. Just based on how y'all sitting, I'm thinking y'all are together, right? Either that or he's getting to second base. All right, so it's really cool. So the people in here, The people in here that are together, right? Before you go to bed tonight, go home tonight, make your spouse their night drink of choice, right? I don't care, no judgment from me, okay? And then tell them, say, I love you with all my heart. I can't possibly love anybody more than you. But the only reason I'm not sleeping with everybody else is because, unfortunately, the Bible forbids it. See how your night goes, right? You're going to have a very questionable quality of an evening. Why? Because the fact that there's a rule is the cheapest reason that we should live, right? So that was the third one was the priestly tradition, where take over the temple, and he wouldn't do that. Jesus chose the most frustrating way to establish the kingdom of God, and that was in the wisdom tradition, which is you invoke permanent change through mustard seed size shifts in someone's heart, that before they realize it, it takes over their whole way of looking at things. And that frustrates everybody. But at the same time, it's the reason we're talking about him today and not Caesar. Any other non-antagonistic, mutually edifying question? Okay, got it. Now we got a tidal wave.
Hi. My question is, when Jesus was on the cross and the soldiers dipped the sponge in the vinegar and stuck it up to his mouth,
Yep.
never understood that. I mean, we read that and we say, oh, they were, trying to be horrible to him.
Yep.
But why would they have had vinegar and a stick and a sponge at that point anyway?
Let's talk about that. And I happen to be prepared for that. All right. So I didn't know that was coming, but it's on some slides because I didn't know how long I'd be talking. It just happens to be on the slide. So I'm with her. I never understood that. A couple things that are law, okay? This was Roman law. You could not help a crucified victim. So if someone's being crucified, they're cursed. You can't help them, or you'd be seen as compliant or complicit with them, and you'd end up being crucified too. The Romans did not care. I mean, if rumor got to Caesar that Moonta had someone planning an uprising, they didn't care about proving it. They showed up in Moonta and crucified everybody. They just got lucky. We're going to get everybody, right? Crucifixion was terrible. I don't want to be gross, but crucifixion's gross. That's why everybody saw the Passion of the Christ once. No one saw it twice. It's not like Friday night Netflix viewing, somebody getting beaten to death, right? Crucifixion was disgusting, and you weren't allowed to help a crucified victim. So when Jesus said, I'm thirsty, if they'd have been allowed to help him, who would have helped him? His mother. She was there. You're not allowed to help. So there's something about this that was actually cruel and seen as torture, right? The question is what? So Jesus says, I'm thirsty. It doesn't fit the narrative. They've been trying to kill him all day in the worst way possible. And then right there at the end, he says, I'm thirsty, and they get him something to drink. And not only do they get him something to drink, they get him alcohol, which would help, right? So none of this makes sense. Didn't make sense to me either. And I have a rule, if I don't understand it or it doesn't make sense, I just don't talk about it instead of pretending. I don't want to be an ultra-crepidarian, right? There's too many other things we could talk about. But then I took a course on first century or ancient Roman history. The reason I did is because I like learning things, and I thought it would help me with the Bible. Like I thought learning about Philippi would help me with Philippians, Ephesians would help me with Ephesus, and so forth and so on. And session 6 of the term was on first century Roman hygiene. Trust me, the world's getting better. If you have a flushing toilet, your world is better than anybody else's. I had the honor of visiting the home of the King of Wales from 1350. Trust me, your house is better. I've never been to any of your houses, but your house is better. Like, if your great-grandfather came back from the dead, the things in your house that would blow his mind is unbelievable. What's that? It's a fridge. Wow. Keeps food cool. Unbelievable. What's that? It's a car. What's that do? Takes us wherever we want to go at 110K an hour. Wow. On a paved road. Yes. Unbelievable. What's that? It's a tap. What's that do? Brings clean, drinkable water into our house under pressure. Wow. What's the other one? That's the hot water. Right. You have hot water coming into your house under pressure. Yes. And it's drinkable. Yes. Barely, but yes. Yes. Yes, 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 it is. What's that? That's toilet paper. It's amazing. It's amazing. We saw you collecting corn cobs. Not necessary. We have toilet paper now. It's amazing. It's amazing. What's that? That's the wet wipes. What's that do? That's the thing that shows us the toilet paper is not as foolproof as we thought. It's amazing, right? Right? So the world is way better. Now, the Romans were terrible people. Here, the things I listed earlier were all legal: murder, rape, pedophilia, bestiality, nailing people to trees and waiting for them to suffocate, making underclass people perform to the death just to entertain upper-class people. This was all legal in the Roman Empire. But it wasn't all bad. One of the things that Rome did that made the world better were two main things. One, roads, like ease of transportation, and two, plumbing. So the Romans figured out the most advanced plumbing technique of that day, right? And when they came into places like Galilee, they would introduce the plumbing, right? Because before the Romans got there, the Galileans just pooped in a bowl. And don't panic, you poop in a bowl, but it's just hooked to plumbing, right? They actually had a designated slop bowl that everybody had to use, and then when you were done, you just threw it out. Well, the Romans showed up, and they're like, what are you, a bunch of barbarians, right? Do you carry poop around? Irony. So you had that. Well, so the Romans, yeah, you caught that. That went over most people's head. That was a good one. That was a good one. Thank you, ma'am. You're making me feel like Chris Rock up here. That's nice. So the Romans introduced these public toilets. The problem is how did you clean yourself? And so you had four options: fig leaves, moss, quite messy. A common option was your bare left hand. So you'd clean yourself with your bare left hand, and then you'd wash it as good as you could. That's why in the first century, you would never, ever say, how are you? You would not extend your left hand, ever. If you did, it would be like a racial slur. It'd be like using the N-word or something, like something no smart, like you would never deride somebody. And by the way, this is an aside, that's why there was a difference between right-handed slaps and left-handed slaps. A right-handed slap was for social equals. A left-handed slap was if I was class 2 and you were class 8, you're not worth my clean hand, I'm going to hit you with my left hand. This is the hand I clean. It was essentially a racial slur, like you're less human than me, but with violence. Oh, by the way, remember when Jesus said, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, well, to slap someone on the right cheek, if someone uses their left hand to call you less human, what do? You don't escalate the violence, you turn the other cheek. In other words, only present the side of you that makes them address you as an equal. It'll cut that stuff out, right? This is genius stuff from a first century rabbi, right? And so you'd have that. So the most common way to clean yourself was they would have sponges from the ocean, and they'd put them on sticks. And then they would have, the beggars would offer their services to help clean them. Then they'd work on tips, or you would do it yourself, right? And so this was just sponges on sticks were common. Let me show you in case you are doubting me here. No, it's not a picture of the act. It's just a, if you could go forward for me, if you don't mind. Yeah, go forward one more. Yeah, and one more. And one more. Yeah. So this is an artist rendition of the Roman toilet systems. And as you could see, they weren't very private. But that's a massive improvement, and it wasn't gender specific, but it's actually a marked improvement over pooping in a bowl, right? But it's kind of close quarters. It's like, hey, Jim, what'd you have for dinner? Well, you're fixing to find out. It was that, you know? It's kind of awkward, right? But I was told if I do this, I'm like, oh, what? So if you look at that, the guy in this side. Oh, right. If you look at that guy in the bottom right, he's holding a spongium, is what it was called. It's a xylospongium. It's a sponge on a stick. And it's a little pixelated, but the guy's up there holding it too. If you're doubting this, I would never lie to you about this. Why? It's easy to check. All you got to do is Google first century Roman toilet paper, and you hit that next one for me. And you get this. It says a sponge stick, the ancient equivalent of toilet paper, well known from literary sources. So what they would do, once they had the sponge on the stick, the question is how did you sanitize the sponge? So what they did is in the public bathhouses, they had buckets of undrinkable wine and vinegar. And you would swirl it in the bucket, and it would sanitize the sponge to first century standards, not to our standard by any. So what's happening in this story is Jesus says, I'm thirsty. And somebody there is cruel enough to go, I know what to get him to drink. And they found a sponge on a stick soaked with sour wine and vinegar. What were they lifting to his face? The public toilet butt wipers. And what was Jesus' response? Forgive him. Forgive him. See, we tend to read the Bible and we read ourselves in as the good guys. Like we would never do that. I hope not. But just for a second, let's consider. Here's what's happening in that story. Jesus is giving his life for this guy. And this guy's offering back to Jesus was a dirty Roman sponge. How about you? Jesus has given his life for you. Does your life back to him, does it lift up to him as a sweet-smelling incense? Or does it smell like a dirty Roman sponge? Is your life of compassion and generosity and kindness and love, is it a sweet-smelling incense offering? Or is our life of anger and greed and calling people idiots and pride and apathy, is it a dirty Roman sponge? Part of the issue with the cross is Jesus has given his life for all of us. And the challenge is what will our life's offering be back? Will it be a compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, kind, generous commitment to growth, incense offering? Or will it be a sponge offering of anger, greed, calling people idiots, apathy, things that Jesus said bring hell to the world? And so for all of us, we should wrestle with, is my offering sweet or is it a sponge? That's what's going on in that story. I think we have time for one more, and it'll be this guy.
Give us your best favourite part of Tabernacle and how that relates to Jesus. Maybe.
Sure, give me a second. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's pretty apropos to history. So if you look at how the tabernacle was laid out, you have the laver and the brazen altar side by side. And so to the side of the altar where they made the offerings, you had this place of washing. And what would happen is particularly during the Feast of Tabernacles, they had something called the water and wine ceremony, where they would come up with pitchers of wine and pitchers of water, and they would pour it on the altar until it overflowed. And when it overflowed, it went down the steps. And that's exactly when Jesus said, I am the living water. So there's this kind of stuff. So to understand this, though, we have to understand there's a common imagery. In Jewish culture, when blood and water mix, it means hope flows through suffering. So it goes all the way back to Genesis, where it says there's a river called Pishon. It winds through the entire land of Havilah. Well, in Hebrew, Pishon is hope, Havilah is suffering. So when a Hebrew person read that, they read, if you're in the land of suffering, there's a river called hope flowing somewhere in it. You just got to go find it, right? In other words, if you're in the land of suffering, there's always a river called hope flowing somewhere in it. And the interesting thing is it says in that river was perfect gold. Now, if you take perfect gold and put it into water, it makes a colloidal suspension and turns all the water blood red. It's how they make stained glass. A scientist in Perth did it for me. He gave it to me in a little vial. It looked like a blood sample, right? And all it takes is 1 part gold to 100,000 parts of water. I used to carry it around with me. And if I was going to preach on that topic, and I'd stand at the door, "Way, welcome," and somebody would always say, "Why are you carrying your blood sample around?" Right? It looked like that. And so for them, if the river of hope, there's a lot of rivers in the land of suffering. There's a river called give up, sell out, make matters worse. But you want to find the river of hope. And the river of hope is always found when you found the river with gold in the riverbed. Well, if there's gold in the riverbed, what color would the river be? Red. So anytime water turns red, it's in Egypt, he gets them out of Egypt by turning all the water into blood. They cross the Red Sea. I've seen the Red Sea. It's blue, right? The idea is hope flows through suffering. They make a gold cow. Moses beats it into powder and makes them throw it in the water. Well, if they throw it in the water is red. Hope flows through suffering. It's in creation when a woman gives birth, her water breaks. And in labor, blood and water flow. So out of the greatest suffering a woman might ever know comes a bundle of joy. Jesus' first miracle was turning all the water into wine. What was his point? To provide adult beverages for the party? No. It was in a world where they were enslaved again. He's doing something so subversive. He's like, you might be in the land of suffering now, but hope's fixing to flow. At the Feast of Tabernacles, he stands up and says, I'm the living one. In other words, the hope that's supposed to flow through suffering that the temple's promised for years and never delivered, I'm here to save the day. So you have that. And then at the cross, it says that they stuck him in his side, and out of his side came a steady flow of blood and water. And it happens to be the same side as the altar and the laver in the temple. And so the idea of the cross is the forgiveness of sins. But it's not just the forgiveness of sins. It's God's intent to bring hope to every place we suffer. And for that, my brothers and sisters, may you not just be saved in the sense of I'm forgiven. May you feel and embrace and surrender to the reality that wherever you're suffering, hope's fixing to flow. And may we respond to that great love, never ever with a dirty sponge, but always with a sweet smelling incense. Thanks for letting me be a part of your night. Grace and peace, everybody.